Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. That was a really fantastic intro. One point of order. So I'm not here to speak, right? I come to these events to learn, to meet people. I don't have my lanyard on. I've got 2 green dots on my lanyard. That means come and talk to me, say hi. I love meeting people. So that said, then, I'm here to talk about this thing. I've been, teching for about 35 years or something. And for the last 15 or so of those, I've been a consultant, mostly independent, which means I go into lots of companies and I cause mischief, and it's great fun. And so this talk is a very condensed version of what I've been doing for the last decade or so, or one of the main things I do. And so I talk about business agility, and it's one of these, what it means, whatever you want it to mean. I think it means designing an organization so that it can respond to feedback, understand its customers, figure out what it wants to do, and then do it, right? So let's start with some basics, right? I want to really unpack this. What do we mean? What's the goal of organization design? So that's a question, so you get to say stuff, right? What's the point of organization design? What are we doing when we do this? How can you achieve your goals? How do you deliver value? I love that. What's value? How do you deliver value? It's great. Business value. Whee! I thought I'd just really take this right back to basics. I think the goal of org design is to build the best structure we can, the best organization we can, to do the best work that we can, okay? And there's a caveat here, for now. Because I think that the nature of work changes over time, and the structures we need to do that work should change over time. But also, the more alert of you, I know this is like first thing in the morning, the more alert of you will notice that I just kick the can down the road, right? Because what do you mean? What's best structure and best work? Yeah. So let's take a look at some of those things then. What do I mean by the best work we can do for now? Well, most organizations I go into, like digital product organizations or digital service organizations, they're building stuff. And the stuff they're building, they call this delivery, okay? So the stuff they're building is features, is enhancements, is changing systems or building new systems. And then when I look at their backlogs or however they're structuring their work, it's basically a load of that. And there's a slightly pejorative term of a feature factory. Am I going to be a feature factory? Am I going to just churn out code? And in some contexts, that's actually not a bad thing. The thing you do want to do is get something to market that has a certain feature set, and that's the job. The problem is that that's not all of the job. Because then we've got things like discovery. So discovery, and there's 2 types of discovery. Learning what it is we want to build. That's like customer research and understanding our customers and understanding our market. And also discovery in terms of understanding how we're going to build this thing. So discovery is all about risk. And I spend a lot of time these days with C-suites, and I don't know how that happened, because I'm a programmer. I still cut code whenever I can, right? But I sort of get engaged by often CTOs and CIOs, most recently a CFO of a bank, and he's approached me and he said, we're going through this digital transformation. We've got a new CIO, clearly very, very smart individual, has said that we need to completely rethink this stuff. As CFO, and I could have just reached out and hugged him for this. As CFO, I need to understand risk and governance and all those grown-up things. And usually when a CFO is because this is wrong and it has to be stopped, he said, then I need to know how I can best support him. I was like, oh, I like you. So we're working together. So I'm helping him understand what all this technology changes and how that affects the rest of the organization. But that's not all of it, because we have Kaizen. Kaizen is this lovely Japanese word. If you don't understand something, give it a Japanese word, because it makes you sound wise, okay? So I'm going to give you some wisdom. So Kaizen generally means continuous improvement. The actual Japanese word means continuous improvement. I use it in a broader sense than process change. I use it in a sense of a system of work. So any work we do that changes the system of work and makes it a better system, that's Kaizen. And again, that's not all the work. That's all the work we'd like to be doing, but we've also got to keep the lights on, right? Business as usual, BAU work. Day-to-day, run the business, they call it RTB, run the business and change the business. all the run the business stuff, all your reporting, all of your run books, all of your ops, all of your system stuff, all of your day-to-day business processes that are how we make money, right? That all has to happen. And this happens in the context of stuff goes wrong. Stuff goes wrong we call failure demand. So failure demand is any work we do that we shouldn't have had to do, right? Ask Google about work they shouldn't have had to do, or Cloudflare about work they shouldn't have had to do recently. Okay, I have no idea what that is, but let's just go with it. So not just responding to incidents and recovery and things like that, but also often when something goes wrong, we only discover much later, and we've got a load of data corruption to go back and fix, and also all of the stuff that happens afterwards, the meetings and the wash-ups and the postmortems and all that. So that's our work, right? And our work kind of splits into two halves. We've got the mandatory stuff, the stuff we have to do, and then we get the discretionary bit, right? The things we can choose to do. So that, just park that for a sec, this is the work. Okay, this is all of the work. And generally, we don't look at all of the work. Generally, we just look at the stuff in green. Okay? And all the rest of it kind of gets shoved in at the edges. So, okay, what's the best structure then? This is where it gets a bit crunchy. The best structure, when you've got a little bit of demand, is easy. You get a little team. And a little team plus the little bit of demand, profit. Okay, you don't even have to collect underpants. You just get profit. Okay? So then what happens is we've got lots of demand. So we've got lots of demand and we've got one team going, whoa! So what do we do? What do we do? Practically every, and this is your little A agiles, your big A agiles, your every organization pretty much I've worked in the last, 20 years or so, we have lots of little teams. Lots of little teams to do lots of little demand, and they all look very similar to each other. Okay, we call them feature teams or scrum teams or whatever. And we get lots of identical teams and lots of demand and lots of, dependencies and waiting and blocking and stuff. And that gives us challenges. Okay? So we end up with challenges, and we have big frameworks for challenges. Why? Why is because we shape the demand to fit, all the textbooks have this, stable, long-lived feature teams. Because who doesn't want stable, long-lived feature teams? Right? Well, it turns out I don't. And let me explain why, because that's a bit of a bold statement, right? Stable teams, the reason we want stable teams is we believe we have a presupposition, a received wisdom, that getting a team up to speed is expensive and time-consuming. We call it gelling a team or forming a team. And this all goes back to a chap called Bruce Tuckman. And Bruce Tuckman did a meta-study of studies. So a meta-study is when you look at other people's research and draw conclusions from a bunch of research. He did this in the 70s, I think, or maybe even earlier. And he was looking at how teams get up to speed. And he came up with the model of forming, storming, norming, performing. Right? We all know this model, yeah? And we know that forming, norming, and storming is expensive before we get to performing, don't we? No, it isn't. No. Because it turns out that you can drive a truck through Bruce Tuckman's research. 50% of the groups he was studying were therapy groups. These are people who come together to do group therapy. What they don't have is any kind of joint enterprise. They also probably don't have a great sense of psychological safety, right? Interpersonal vulnerability. They're sitting there with their own stuff in a group therapy session, possibly under duress, because they have to go there or something. This is not a team getting together to build a product. Of the remaining groups, half of them were HR people doing training. So eyes front, slides, HR, here's our business processes. Okay, again, not really a great set of people to study. So 25% of all the groups he studied were actually teams doing stuff. Subsequent studies, reproducibility, doesn't work, right? But also subsequent studies have said we do forming, storming, and norming, right? That happens, but it can happen very quickly, and it can happen in hours or days, and all of these stages can happen concurrently, right? So you can throw a team together. I used to work for ThoughtWorks. I was there for about a decade. And this happened again and again. You're in a new client, you're going to a bank, a bunch of strangers turn up in your team, developers, testers, analysts, whatever. All you know about them is they work for the same company as you, and we've got a gig, okay? And because of that, I know there's a bar, there's a certain level I can assume capability of testing, of development, of whatever it is, and we just kind of get together and get work done. And that team is up and running within hours, certainly within days, yeah? And there's something about if you have shared values, shared culture, a shared goal, there's a whole load of reasons why that works. But what we don't need is stable teams, it turns out. Consequently, we don't actually need long-lived teams. Long-lived teams suggest that the work is homogeneous over time, right? Last year, we were writing banking software in Java and Scala, and next year, we'll be writing banking software in Java and Scala, and it doesn't really matter which team picks that up. If that's true, go nuts. Long-lived teams is going to work for you. If instead you have 30, 40 different stovepipe systems using name a technology in the last 30 years, and the answer is yes, right? And each of those has one or two key people that really understands that product, or that app, or that domain, or that data set, and they are in a different team right now, you end up with this huge artificial deadlock thing. So we only need long-lived teams to the extent that the work is long-lived. And then feature teams. Well, not everything's a feature, as we've seen, right? And not everything needs the same shape and structure of people, because not all the work is the same shape and structure. And that leaves us with teams. I'm like, okay, well, that whole bunch of constraints just left the room. So what if we rethink the question? What if we flip the question on its head, and what if we shape the teams to fit the demand? That'd be cool. The one thing I don't have control over is the demand. Yeah? So I take all the demand and put it in a big bag, and all the people and put them in a big bag, and shake it up and see what happens. Okay? Obviously, you need the people in the bag to be willing to be in a bag. Right? You don't do this at people. So let's take a look at this then. I've got now tons and tons of work and my tiny little team. What does my tiny little team do? How am I going to get this work done? What they do is they invite their friends. And they all just start turning up. It's fab. And now I've got a whole gang of people, and they're all there. And it's wonderful. And, brilliant. So now I've got a load of people, and I've got a load of work I'm trying to do. And I call this thing demand-led planning. And that's what I want to talk to you about today in the remaining 11 minutes that I have. How does demand-led planning work then? Well, the first thing we do is we identify the demand. We start on the demand, hence demand-led. I'm trying to remove all jargon from my consulting work, right? Jargon is just mental load. It's effort. I don't want that. Demand-led planning is planning led by demand, right? So we start with the demand. And, of course, actually, we start with all the demand because we forget stuff, yeah? And now, do you remember we had mandatory work that has to get done? Of the discretionary spend, I've got my delivery, discovery, and Kaizen in my discretionary spend. I need to decide where I want to shift the dials for typically quarterly. I do this quarterly. Each quarter, we might have just done a release. We've just done a release, loads of happy customers, trying out a bunch of new features. Let's double down on Kaizen. Let's tidy up the shop now. Yeah? Or conversely, we haven't done anything really exciting for a while. Let's get a load of cool new functionality out the door. My only rule with these dials is you're not allowed to have zero. Okay? You're not allowed to do no discovery, you're not allowed to do no delivery, because that's our reputation, and you're not allowed to do no Kaizen. If you're not fixing things, you're not growing.
Hope you're enjoying this video, but did you know Lead Dev has lots more to offer?
So webinar, podcasts, I even like articles, conferences, events, and most importantly, community.
And even thinking about like process, tech, and people, which is how Lead Dev website is laid out, I really think this is the #1 learning platform for me as an engineering manager.
Don't forget to check out leaddev.com.
So we've got all the demand, we've figured out how much of it we want to do, and now different people pitch that demand to their buddies. And the people pitching the demand might be product managers and commercial people, or they might be technical people for internal Kaizen work, or they might be CX people, UX people looking at customer research discovery work. But they pitch the demand to all of their buddies. So everyone's in the room, and I've done this with 20 people, I've done this with 90 people, I've done this with 200 people. I don't think it goes much above 200. Above 200, you kind of want a different thing, but it does scale pretty well. And then what happens is this. Because what you can't then do is say, hey, everyone, go do work. Right? That doesn't work. Okay? So what we need is some constraints. We need some constraints. In the UK, we're in the UK, we drive on the left. In the last couple of weeks, I've been in various places where they drive on the right. Turns out it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. As long as everyone drives on the same side. That's the only thing that matters. Otherwise, people die. And that would be bad. right? So someone needs to decide which side we drive on, and that becomes the rules of the road. So some of my rules, 3 to 10 people. Fewer than 3 people in a team, you're always in meetings. More than 10 people in a team, you're going to get in each other's way. It's just going to happen, okay? I want my teams to be fully autonomous, and I have a very deliberate and specific definition of autonomous. Autonomous means that group of people can consume that work themselves with no external delays. That doesn't mean they have no external dependencies, right? If I go to someone, I have my legal expert, I don't need my full-time legal expert full-time in the team. That's not a very great allocation of that person. What I do instead, though, is if I need access to my legal person, I'm going to get an instant response. She's going to get straight back to me and say, yes, this is the answer you need. What I don't end up is blocked on any of my external dependencies. So that's what autonomous means. It means we've got the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the authority, permission. How often has your team been blocked trying to get a hole punched in the firewall, right? Or get access to a particular server or any of that stuff, yeah? You need the permission to do the work, otherwise you don't have autonomy. And the resources, right? So, skills and knowledge, I know how to fly a plane. Experience, I have flown a plane. Authority, I have a pilot's license. Resources, I have a plane. If you don't have a plane, none of the other stuff mattered, yeah? So I want fully autonomous teams. And the other rule we have is all this stuff gets done. All this stuff came into the room. We've prioritized that we're going to do this stuff for the next quarter. You don't get to not do the boring stuff, okay? And then we have the idea that we don't have to allocate everyone to a team. Because sometimes, remember, we're looking at this as a system of work, not a bunch of teams, right? That system of work will benefit from someone maybe bumblebee, butterfly, bouncing around between several teams, okay? And that's going to work better. I have what I call a 3x3 rule, which is a bumblebee shouldn't work across more than 3 teams because context switching. And also, a team shouldn't ever have more than 3 bumblebees in a quarter because there's just too much knowledge transfer and stuff. That seems to be, that's a heuristic, right? That's a heuristic. You don't have to do this. And then we have kind of optional rules. So I might say, in a particular quarter, so for instance, at John Lewis, we did this. Started with 90 people. They scaled it up to 200 people. I heard back from them recently that it doesn't scale to 500. I'm like, of course it doesn't. But it's pretty cool they got it to 200. I'm impressed with that. But what we did early on, we wanted people to get a real understanding of how the whole product area worked rather than just their one lane that they were in. And so we suggested that at least that you could only have 2 people staying in the same team quarter on quarter. Everyone else had to move. And that caused people to do loads of kind of learning, right? We wanted 2 people to stay in each team because that meant that you had the continuity and everyone else got to run around, okay? The second time we did, or second or third quarter in, we flipped it. We said we want a maximum, we want people to mostly stay where they are because we can start getting metrics out. I need to speed up. Likewise, min-max duration. So you can't stay with the team for too long, or you should stay with the team for a period of time. So these are our constraints. And then we say, right, everyone, run around. People of a certain age will get that reference, but we say, run around, and off they go. Flying to the, oh, that didn't work. Okay, crap. So we've got a swarm of people up here. That looks really interesting. No one wants to do the reporting. No one, okay? So what did we do? What we did is we said, hey, folks, this isn't working, is it? So we need to test. Yeah, we need to test this. And we look at it and we say, look, let's apply our constraints. Does this configuration meet our constraints? And the answer is no. And so, and this, again, was John Lewis. I love this story. There's a bunch of people in a room, and everyone's like everyone's looking down, like no one wants to go do that work over there. And then this one guy is a contractor. He hasn't even got skin in this, right? He's a contractor. He just starts walking across the floor to this gap. And as he's walking across the floor, people started applauding, right? As he gets there, by the time he's at the other side of the room, it's a big room, by the time they're cheering and whooping, right? And someone else has joined him, and so all of these people, eventually we ended up with a configuration that was going to work. And it was really cool. And now these newly formed teams, they're going to spend a bit of time chatting, looking at the scope of what they're trying to do, and they're going to come up with a big, hairy, audacious goal. And that big, hairy, audacious goal, in the spirit of OKRs, is aspirational. I'm not going to beat them up if they don't do it. No one gets in trouble. It's just like, how far could you get? Right, let's go for how far could you get, and let's see how far you end up getting, because that would be really cool. And they all kind of go, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and they pitch back what they're going to do, and everything is this part of the day or the 2 days is very high energy, in my experience, okay? So I've done this. When you first do this, you probably want to do it over 2 days, which sounds like a long time, but you're planning a quarter's work for like 100 people. It's actually not bad. After several quarters of doing this, at Bank of America we did this, you could get like 80 people in a room, and you would plan out the quarter's work, do all of this, and you're done by lunchtime. You can plan all of the work in like half a day once you get good at it. But it takes a while to get good at it. And then we all go for beer or some value of beer, right? We all get together, break bread. This is when socializing happens. This works. I can't begin to tell you that some activities need to be in person. Some activities are fine to be virtual. Some activities, this kind of activity, you want everyone in the same physical room. I've done virtual demand-led planning sessions. It works. It's not the same energy, okay? So just in the last couple of minutes then, this doesn't magically happen, okay? I'm doing a Director Plus session this afternoon, kind of going into a bit of more of this. And the entire session is this slide, right? Before, during, after, yeah? So what are the things you need to have in place for this to be successful? There's a whole load of stuff around engagement, education, getting people comfortable with the idea of this sort of change and that they will be driving this change. Readiness criteria. We didn't lead with this. I think it was John Lewis. I was there for a year or so before we tried this. Same at Bank of America, same at a bunch of other places that I'm not allowed to name. But by and large, it's a thing you build up to, okay? Think of during. If you're managing, if you're wrangling 100 or so people across 2 days, think about facilitation. Think about who you're going to need, what resources, facilities, all of that stuff. Think of the logistics of planning effectively a reasonably large event, he says at LDX3 that has 1,500 people. Not that large. But 100 people in a room is quite a lot of wrangling. And then after, we did things like, and this wasn't my idea, this was one of my genius team came up with this, sent out a Likert survey. You know, there's like strongly disagree, strongly agree things. And statements like, I feel connected to the work, I understand the value of the work, I feel engaged in the process, I'm excited about the next quarter. And all of these things are over on the right, like strong agree or agree. And it was amazing the amount of engagement people felt with their work because they got to choose where they went and because it had been pitched, right? We don't need to do this work, we need to do this work because, right? Try and make audit reporting sound sexy, right? Someone did. They did a really good job and people went, I want to go and help with that, that's important. So this is kind of it then. So identify demand, allocate discretionary spend, pitch the demand, introduce the constraints so everyone knows what the rules of the road are, have a go, expect it to take 2 or 3 iterations, okay? Declare your big, hairy, audacious goal, and then break bread. I have an exclusive announcement for LDX3. I'm very excited about this. I've been independent for a bunch of time. I've just created a new consulting thing called Goalwoods. Goalwoods is live as of 9:55 on the 16th of June. This is my launch announcement. Goalwoods is live. Go have a look. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your conference.